Elijah's shoes clicked sharply on the cold tile floor, the sound echoing through the quiet terminal. The hum of the air conditioning was the only other noise, but the stillness felt heavy, as though the entire airport was holding its breath. She approached the check-in counter, her heart racing. A woman in a pilot's uniform stood behind it, tapping her pen impatiently, her eyes never leaving the screen in front of her. Elijah cleared her throat and spoke, her voice steady but her stomach in knots. "I need to check in for my flight to Chicago." The pilot didn't look up. She stared at Elijah with eyes full of judgment, narrowing them the moment they met hers. There was no greeting, no smile, just a cold, dismissive assessment that made Elijah feel like she was invisible, like she didn't belong here. For a moment, the silence stretched on, the tension between them building, thick enough to cut with a knife. Then the pilot finally spoke, her voice sharp and condescending. "You're in the wrong line," she said, her eyes barely glancing up. "This is for business class passengers." Elijah's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't going to let this woman win. She straightened her back, gathering the strength she had learned to find over the years. "I'm flying business," Elijah said, a little louder now, her voice steady. The pilot didn't even flinch. Instead, she gave Elijah a sneer, quick but unmistakable, and muttered, "Whatever." Elijah stood frozen for a moment, fighting the urge to lash out. But before she could respond, the pilot's voice cut through the air, louder this time, meant for everyone to hear. "There's a black kid causing trouble." Elijah's blood ran cold. The words rang in her ears, the sting of them burning deeper than she ever expected. That was it, the final straw, the moment she couldn't let go. Elijah's chest tightened as she fought the urge to cry. She had spent years learning to brush off moments like this, to let the harsh words slide off her skin. But today, in this moment, they stuck. The sting of humiliation made her feel small, powerless. Her mind raced, replaying every detail. The pilot's sneer, the subtle dismissal, the echo of the words hanging in the air. She wasn't a stranger to prejudice, but it never got easier. She'd been through this before, far too many times. At school, at stores, in her own neighborhood, but never in a place that was supposed to feel safe like an airport. Elijah had always been proud of who she was, proud of where she came from. She was the daughter of a prominent FAA administrator, someone who had worked his whole life to break barriers. But none of that mattered here. None of it mattered to the woman standing in front of her, or to anyone else who was watching. A sinking feeling settled in her stomach as she glanced around. The bystanders in the terminal seemed to avoid eye contact, pretending not to notice. It was as if this was normal. And maybe for them it was. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "You're going to face obstacles, baby. You'll always have to work harder than others. But you have to remember, your worth isn't defined by their ignorance." But it felt like Elijah's worth was constantly under attack. It wasn't just the pilot. It was the unspoken understanding that people like her were never truly accepted. That no matter how accomplished, how smart, how deserving, there would always be someone out there who would see her skin first, her potential second. She exhaled slowly, trying to steady her nerves. But as she glanced at the pilot again, something inside her snapped. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all the people who had been treated like this, all the years of being overlooked, dismissed, and degraded. She wasn't going to let it slide this time. Just as Elijah was about to speak, the sound of heavy footsteps approaching the counter made her freeze. She turned, and a tall man in a sharp uniform walked into view. His stance was confident, his gaze steady. There was an authority in the way he moved, and Elijah's heart skipped a beat when she realized who he was. It was her father, Captain Thomas, her father, the FAA administrator. The man who had spent his entire career breaking barriers. The man whose legacy was one of respect and dignity in the aviation world. The man who had always taught her that standing up for herself was the only way to fight back. The pilot's eyes widened when she saw him, her posture faltering for a moment. But before she could react, her father's voice cut through the tension in the air. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone calm, but carrying a weight of authority that made the pilot stiffen. She didn't answer right away, her eyes darting from him to Elijah, then back to him. The color drained from her face. Elijah stood there, unsure if this moment was real. She had seen her father command respect in boardrooms and meetings, but never like this. Never in this kind of personal confrontation. The pilot stammered, trying to find her words, but they were lost. She began, but her voice faltered. Her father didn't let her finish. If you can't do your job professionally, I'll be more than happy to report this, he said quietly, but everyone in the terminal could hear it. The pilot's face flushed with embarrassment, but she didn't have the courage to argue. The power dynamic had shifted. The tension in the terminal was palpable. Elijah's heart raced, but she kept her gaze steady on the pilot, who was now visibly flustered, trying to regain control. Around them, passengers shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, some pretending not to notice. It was as if the whole room had taken a collective breath, waiting for the next move. But Elijah's father stood firm, his presence commanding, like a wall of authority. The pilot swallowed hard, but her eyes flicked nervously to Elijah, as though she couldn't quite believe what was happening. Her grip on the counter tightened, her knuckles turning white. "This isn't how things are supposed to work," the pilot muttered, almost to herself, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "We don't just let anyone fly in business class. You're not even supposed to be here." Elijah's breath hitched at the words. She knew she wasn't the only one who had heard them. Others were staring now, too, some with sympathy, some with judgment. The weight of their stares felt heavier than ever. It wasn't just her fight anymore. It was everyone who had ever been treated like this, who had been belittled or dismissed because of the color of their skin. Her father's expression remained unreadable as he took a step closer, closing the space between him and the pilot. "My daughter has every right to be here. She's not some anyone. She's someone with a seat, a ticket, and respect." Elijah's chest swelled with pride, but there was something more, something that burned in the pit of her stomach. This wasn't just about standing up for herself. It was about standing up against the injustices so deeply ingrained in the world around them. The pilot, now visibly rattled, looked from Elijah to her father. Her confidence was shattered, her veneer of authority crumbling. "I didn't mean it that way," she stammered, but her words were hollow. "You meant exactly what you said," Elijah replied, her voice steady now, filled with the same resolve her father had taught her. The world wasn't going to change unless people like them started calling out this kind of behavior. The pilot's face flushed a deep red. I'm sorry," but the apology rang hollow. The damage was done. As Elijah stood there, watching the pilot scramble for words that didn't seem to mean anything, her mind drifted back to another time. It was a memory from when she was much younger, sitting in the car with her father after a school event. Her heart had been crushed that day, just like it was now. "You know, sometimes the world will make you feel small, like you don't belong," her father had said softly, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he drove them home. "But you never let them see you sweat. You stand tall. You walk proud. And no matter what they say, you remember, they don't define you. You define you." Elijah had looked out the window, feeling the tears sting her eyes. Her father had tried so hard to protect her from the ugly truths of the world, but she was starting to realize that no matter how strong he was, the world still had its way of testing her. Now, standing in the airport, feeling the weight of the pilot's words, Elijah remembered the sting of that rejection. That moment when she first understood what it felt like to be looked down upon simply because of the color of her skin. Her father had always taught her to rise above it, but sometimes it was harder than others. Sometimes, the weight of the world felt too heavy. Elijah had carried that pain with her for years. Every time someone treated her like she didn't belong, every time a door was closed simply because of the prejudice that others held deep in their hearts. She felt the fire rise within her again. This moment wasn't just about the pilot. It was about the countless others who had been treated like this, who had been told they didn't matter. It was about standing up, about making sure that no one could ever do this again, not to her, not to anyone. Her father's voice broke her reverie. "You don't have to fight this fight alone, Elijah. I'm right here with you. Always." That was the final push she needed. She straightened her back, ready to face whatever came next. The terminal seemed to hold its breath as the pilot fumbled with her words, her face a mix of confusion and embarrassment. Elijah's father, Captain Thomas, was still standing with his arms crossed, his eyes fixed firmly on the woman who had tried to belittle his daughter. Elijah, too, remained calm, her posture strong as she felt the weight of her father's support. But just as the tension seemed unbearable, the unexpected happened. Another man entered the scene. A new figure, different from the passengers who had been watching, stepped up to the counter. His uniform was identical to her father's, the same sharp, white shirt, the same captain stripes. His presence was commanding, but there was something even more familiar about him. Elijah's heart skipped a beat when she saw him. It was her father's mentor, Captain George, the one who had helped her father rise through the ranks, the one who had always treated her like family. His arrival brought a wave of relief, but also a sense of unspoken tension. Elijah had never seen him here, in this position, not like this. "Is there a problem here, Thomas?" Captain George asked, his eyes moving between Elijah, her father, and the pilot. His calm voice added an undeniable authority to the moment. The pilot's face turned ghostly white, her hands shaking. Elijah could almost see the shift in her, the realization of who was standing before her, the authority he represented. The shift in the atmosphere was immediate. The pilot's earlier bravado vanished like smoke in the wind. "Captain Thomas, I didn't realize. I didn't mean." The pilot stammered, her earlier confidence completely shattered. Elijah's father didn't let her finish. He glanced over at Elijah, nodding once. The power had shifted, and the once dominant pilot was now facing the consequences of her actions. The pilot's apologies came in a rush, her voice barely audible as she stammered out words that lacked the sincerity Elijah needed to believe them. But it didn't matter anymore. The damage was done, and no amount of weak words could undo the harm that had been caused. Elijah felt a wave of power wash over her as she stood there, side by side with her father and Captain George. "Let me make something clear," Captain Thomas said, his voice firm and unwavering. "This is not just about one incident. This is about respect, professionalism, and dignity. You will not treat my daughter or anyone else like that again." The pilot, still trembling, nodded, her face flushed with shame. Elijah watched her, not with anger, but with a sense of quiet victory. For so long, she had felt powerless in moments like this. But now, in the face of injustice, she was no longer silent. Her father stepped forward, addressing the bystanders who had been watching. "I want everyone to understand," he continued, his gaze sweeping over the gathered crowd, "that we all have a responsibility to stand up when we see injustice. Silence is complicity." Elijah stood tall beside him, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always admired her father's calm authority, but today she saw it in a new light. He wasn't just a man in a uniform. He was a man who fought for what was right. And now she was too. The pilot, now visibly shaken, looked around the terminal, her face still red, but her shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry," she said again, but there was no more fight in her. Elijah turned to her father, meeting his eyes. He gave her a small, knowing nod. She had just witnessed not only the power of standing up for what was right, but also the power of redemption. The world might not change overnight, but moments like this were the first step. As the moments passed, the tension in the terminal began to dissipate. The pilot, now defeated, slowly turned and walked away, her steps heavy with the weight of her humiliation. Elijah watched her retreat, but instead of feeling anger, she felt something far more powerful: relief. Relief that she had stood her ground, that the injustice had been acknowledged, even if only for a brief moment. Her father's hand rested gently on her shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. "You did good, kid," he said softly. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything he had taught her over the years. She wasn't alone in this fight, and in this moment, justice had been served. The passengers who had witnessed the entire ordeal were beginning to disperse, but some paused to nod at Elijah, offering quiet signs of support. A few murmured their apologies, recognizing the discomfort they had felt but had failed to act upon. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Elijah knew that moments like these were the ones that sparked change, even if it was just a small shift in people's hearts and minds. As she stood there, side by side with her father, Elijah felt a sense of catharsis wash over her. She had fought back against the bias that so often sought to define her. She had confronted the injustice, not with rage, but with the quiet strength her father had always taught her to carry. "I'm proud of you," her father said, his voice steady, filled with pride. Elijah nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude flood over her. She had finally found her voice. She looked around at the airport, a place that had felt so cold and alien just moments before, and realized that she had just taken one small step toward changing it. It wasn't over, but it was a start. Together, they walked out of the terminal, the world still uncertain. But for once, Elijah felt ready to face whatever came next. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more powerful narratives, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. Also, let me know in the comments, what would you have done in Elijah's shoes? Should the pilot have faced more consequences? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this situation. And don't forget to share this video with your friends if you think it will inspire them too. Stay strong and always stand up for what's right.